Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another exciting edition of the Comic Obsessive. According to rumors, at least as far as I know, my name is still Jason Dehart, and I'm joined by.
I'm Adam Piles, but that's not very interesting because we're joined by somebody else who's way more interesting. So if you'd like to introduce yourself.
My name is Jef Mallett, and I will try to be as interesting as you guys say.
Well, it's all interesting. It all works. It's all good. I think you're probably a fellow Catcher in the Rye fan. Is that
Oh, absolutely.
accurate?
Yeah, you kind of cut that hint, huh?
Yeah, I cut that reference. I did. That's one of my favorite books to teach, actually. I currently teach at the high school level, and that's a go-to for me, and it spoke to me as a young teen as well.
Your students are fortunate.
All right. Well, I forget what number we're on here. With the
782, is that right?
Hmm.
uh, I don't think so.
It's more like 32 or something like that.
32.
If that works.
Well, would you like to kind of introduce? I mean, you already introduced yourself with name, but we brought you here because of your syndicated strip. Do you want to speak to your strip there for a second?
That'd be a good thing to mention, wouldn't it? I draw a comic strip called Frazz, and I've been doing it for close to a quarter century now, not quite.
Mhm.
Um, my syndicate is Andrews McMeel Syndication, and I'm in papers across the United States, daily and Sunday, and it's it's been a great ride. I really enjoy it, and I'm fortunate enough to still be enjoying it.
Would-
How did you get started on this journey? Kind of an origins question. How did you decide that cartooning was for you?
I think cartooning was for me. Um, like a lot of kids, I drew cartoons when I was a kid. Kids are really good cartoonists, and most of them grow on up to be other things. And I tried a bunch of different directions, but I always kept coming back to cartooning. And I kept coming back to cartooning multiple times. When I was in high school, um, in a little town in Michigan called Big Rapids, um, uh, I was un it seems a stretch to say I was a normal high school student. What's that? But um, I I kind of followed the normal paths, took the normal classes, but I was always drawing cartoons. And at one point, uh, well, I was always drawing cartoons, and I always thought that that would be a great way to make a living someday too. And I knew the odds, sort of. They were pretty long, but I was still interested in it. And my junior year in high school, I had a teacher, an art teacher, who one of us talked the other into an independent study class on drawing a comic strip. And this teacher is one of many teachers, but definitely one of those teachers who had a great influence on me and made the right decision at the right time. And she said, okay, you're going to study comics, and you're going to study comics by drawing a comic strip, and you're going to draw it in real time, you know 6 daily strips a week. She wasn't going to make me do a Sunday strip, but you're going to do 6 daily strips a week starting now. Let's go. And I thought, oh my gosh, okay, it's on. And I did. And shortly after I started doing that, um, she ended up sending me to the local newspaper, the Big Rapids Pioneer. Like I said, Big Rapids wasn't very big, but it was big enough to have a daily newspaper. And they said, yeah, do it for us. So um, through high school, from that point on, and partway through college, I drew a daily comic strip. And through that, I learned that, well, I wasn't ready for the big leagues yet, but it was still someplace I thought I might want to go. And I also wasn't sure about the direction that newspapers were going. Even back then, and I'll spare everybody too much math, I graduated from high school in 1980. Even back then, I was looking at the comics and looking at newspapers and thinking, this may not be the best long-term career decision. Well, the comics got better. Along comes the Far Side, and along
Hmm.
comes Calvin and Hobbes, and okay, that got saved, and now it's really out of my league. Um, but I still kept pursuing other things. I actually ended up going to school to be a nurse, a registered nurse. I never completed school because cartooning kind of came and pulled me back, and uh, I ended up leaving school, leaving school to go pro, so to speak, and work at the Grand Rapids Press, a much bigger newspaper in a much bigger town. And it wasn't like going to a full-time spot. It was full-time freelancing, but it was enough. And I stuck with newspaper, ended up going through that to a bunch of newspaper type of jobs. Ended up at the Capitol Bureau in the middle of Michigan in Lansing, where we covered the Capitol and did a bunch of statewide projects for 8 mid-sized dailies in Michigan for a small chain there. And I was the art director and photo editor and a little bit of everything there. And when it started looking like that bureau was going to be consolidated and closed down, then I thought, oh, geez, I should probably go finish college. But first, maybe this was a stall. I frame it as I didn't want to turn, well, the age I am now and wonder what might have been. So I thought, I'm going to draw a comic strip. And I did the same thing that my art teacher had me do. I said, okay, uh, you're going to draw your samples, but you're going to draw them in real time. You've got a month to draw up a month's worth of strips to submit because I didn't want to get my wish and not be able to handle it. So, um, fortunately, I found a fair amount of interest and ended up with a really good syndicate. Uh, and that was in 2001, and we're still going on. We're we're still here.
Wow, that's very impressive because you spoke to kind of the long odds of getting syndicated, and I did a little research years ago, and you were right that is rare to get syndicated and get published in all these newspapers. So they really saw something in you, which I think anybody who's read the strip can see it too.
Uh,
It's an amazing strip.
Well, thank you. And let's not discount the fact that I got lucky too. The timing has to be just right.
Mhm.
And I happened to have the right idea at the right time. And it was pure luck. It was the changes at my bureau that forced my hand and had me making that shot when I made that shot. But I think that the world was ready for a strip about an elementary school and a strip that was a little bit on the smart side. I don't want to give myself too much credit, but um, I, at that point, after 20 years already in the newspaper business, it was no secret that most newspaper readers were college graduates, unlike me, and um, it was a far cry from the newspapers of the 1930s when that was the media. So I thought, okay, if this is who my readers are, I'm gonna try and challenge them. So I think that's part of what worked too.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say your strip is full of intelligence and warmth, and even like looking at this book right here, Frazz 3.141592. I mean, with the pie going down the side. I mean, people would have to recognize what that is to understand that's the appeal of it. Go ahead.
Oh, that's a nice thing about the timing too, is that uh, maybe I coincided with Google or other kind of easy research because I am not afraid to send my readers off to the library or the encyclopedia or the dictionary. And they like that. And now with Google, it's they don't even have to go to the library for better or for worse. It's kind of nice to go to the library and really get yourself lost in the stacks. But uh, yeah, I was very happy to test that theory that the readers wanted to be challenged and they wanted people to assume a certain level of intelligence. and that it worked. It was encouraging for me as a cartoonist, and also encouraging for me as a human being that the world really is full of that kind of people who like to sweat for their fun.
Yeah. You mentioned Calvin and Hobbes and Far Side. What are some of your other influences in your strip and in your art?
Oh my goodness. Uh, a lot of it comes from uh, comic strips, but I love. Uh, I guess it isn't even comic strip, but George Booth was one of my huge heroes. With the New Yorker and a lot of the New Yorker cartoonists. They're just fantastic. Mort Drucker with Mad Magazine. Uh, Jack Davis, oh my gosh, Jack Davis, also with Mad Magazine and Time Magazine and you name it, he's been there. Um, Jack Davis made a huge impact on me with the way he was able to make his characters move. As far as I'm aware, he didn't do anything with actual animation. It was still 2D stills, like I specialize in. But when you saw his characters, they they were not just inflatables. They had a skeleton, they had mass, they had weight, they had to balance, and they had to move. And he was just a huge influence in that regard. Um, so yeah, a big influence there. People notice a lot of Calvin and Hobbes influence, and I think probably 80% of that is Frazz's spiky hair. But anybody my age was going to be hugely influenced by Bill Watterson and by Gary Larson, just like anybody of any age has been influenced by Charles Schulz. It's There's such good stuff out there, and once it's good, it stays good. It stays good for a long time. But I get a lot of influence from uh, reading books and reading poetry and listening to music. I love listening to music. And I love a good singer-songwriter. I love what they can do with the language and how they're doing a lot of the same thing that I'm trying to do, which is tell as complete a story as possible or as impactful a story as possible in a really limited time frame, time and space and format. So I've always loved singer-songwriters, but I'm kind of biased toward that too because I grew up in a family of musicians. My father is retired now. My parents are both living, but my father's retired now, and he taught music in the public schools, mostly vocal music, but also general music. Huge influence that way. My mother was a very talented musician, still is, played in a lot of regional symphonies. She probably could have played for a big city symphony if she hadn't decided to raise a family instead. So a lot of musical influence. My brother has a doctorate in performance. It's funny, you grow up in a musical family like that, it's perfect because then you can be a cartoonist and look like the responsible one. Um,
Were you ever a comic book reader, like the Marvel or the DC type stuff?
a little bit, but not as dedicated as you might think, and not as dedicated as a lot of people are today. If but if you were to pick out one of my biggest influences just in my learning career journey, I guess that's probably the word, from being a young kid that's a sponge. One of my best sources to this day, one of my best sources for literature were those classic comic books. Do you remember those? Are
Hmm.
you are you
Yeah.
old enough that those were a thing when you were young? Um, they were just fantastic. I loved those. And that's the comic books that I really paid attention to. Yes, there were Marvel comic books out there, and it was interesting kind of stuff. Uh, and actually, one of the best books that I can recommend for cartoonists who want to do the Jack Davis, hopefully Jef Mallett thing, where they make their 2D characters move, is a book called Drawing Comics the Marvel Way, because that's what they had to do. That was before there was all this Marvel Cinematic Universe. They had to make their own characters jump off the page. Very, very good at that. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of the comic books, even though I was never the comic book collector kind of guy.
My art teacher in seventh grade had a copy of How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, and I borrowed and read that thing a
Isn't it
million times.
great?
It is great. And then I didn't discover until the invention of YouTube that there had been a video that went along with it. So there's like an hour
Oh, I
long
didn't
video.
know that.
Yep.
Yeah,
There's an hour long video of, I think it's John Buscema sitting there at his drawing board, like basically a little online class, basically with Stan Lee standing there beside him
that's
talking.
amazing.
Yeah,
That's
it's great.
great.
You should look it up. It's really fun
I
to see.
will.
Yeah, I would say it was produced in the early 80s, I would say.
That sounds
So,
about right.
yeah, yeah, good
But
stuff.
actually, that sounds about right for the book, but it sounds really ahead of its time for, video. That was well before YouTube.
Yeah.
Um, but
Um,
yeah, a companion video would be great.
I found it on YouTube, and then
Mm.
Jason and I both love the traditional comics with Marvel and DC and Independent. And I was
Mhm,
flipping through an
mhm.
old Marvel, and there was the ad for it. It had like the cover of the VHS.
Of
Um,
course. Oh my
yeah,
gosh. Yeah, yeah. That's great.
good stuff.
Yeah. Well, speaking of some process, you were talking about music. If you could sort of hire anyone, commission anyone to write the theme song for Frazz and perform it.
Oh, that is a better question than you even realize, because um, when we developed the comic strip, my first syndicate was United Media,
Mhm.
and got the comic strip ready to launch. And at that point, they'll have you go to their main offices. United Media as a syndicate doesn't really exist anymore, and I'm with a different syndicate, but that's the one that I started with. And they had me come to New York, right there on Madison Avenue, and present the comic strip and the idea to their sales staff, who was then going to go out and try and sell it to people. And I'm not sure if I was supposed to. They had to know about the strip already. The materials had been printed up, everything was all set. But I think it was just a chance for me to get to know them. But at that, especially in the earliest days of the strip, Frazz himself was a singer-songwriter.
Mhm.
That's part of his character lineage. And so I thought, well, what I need to do is sing these guys a Frazz theme song.
Mm.
And so I did. And I'm good with words. And I can fake my way through singing, but to actually write music, that's my parents' and my brother's territory. So I stole the tune from a relatively obscure Lyle Lovett song, um, and put my own words to that, and presented that. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever done, and I've done a lot of terrifying things. But yeah, I sang it a cappella, it's because I can't play a guitar or anything. I can't accompany myself. So, um, but I'm digressing. But to answer your question, not only would I choose Lyle Lovett to write the theme song or perform the theme song, I stole the theme song from Lyle Lovett, or at least the melody.
Love it. Love it.
Well, what is your creative process like? Because it's a demanding thing. You said you gave yourself that assignment first. Your art teacher or your teacher did uh, to do a strip in real time, but that's such a demanding schedule to do it day in, day out,
I
forever.
see
It
the
is.
espresso machine back there. I'm guessing that has
Oh,
something to
that's
do with
yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a popular thing. It's part of my morning routine. I love it. But yeah, that's a lot of short stories to write. and I'd consider it a writing job every bit as much as I considered a drawing job. Actually, probably much more so, because you've got to come up with the content, and then uh, the art really supports the storyline as much as it advances a storyline. And some cartoonists, I know I've watched them work, they cannot think without a sketch pad in their hand. And that's not me. I will write out basically little tiny screenplays and set it up that way. And as I'm going, once I get the screenplays written, um, now I'm less the writer and more like the director. So, uh, I'll flesh things out. The dialogue will advance a little bit depending on what I draw, and then the drawings might change a little bit depending on what I write. It's always a process of uh, one side is just a little ahead of the other side until the deadline comes and you've got to finish it off. You've got to get the rest of it done. But yeah, if you want the step-by-step process really quickly, I'll write the little screenplays and print them out, and then I'll draw the 6 dailies at a time, and then I'll draw the Sunday all by itself, and then I go back to 6 more dailies, and then the Sunday. So we'll do it with the dailies, and then you can extrapolate the Sunday from that. But I'll write the screenplays and print them out, and then tape up a big piece of Bristol board that I can do 6 strips on at once. Um, that helps with the speed because you can kind of assembly line it through. You do all the rough penciling at once rather than finish a strip, start the next one from scratch, finish the strip, start the next one from scratch. Plus, it helps with the continuity too. So anyway, I'll tape the big board up, map out 6 strips worth of space, and then I'll map out, how much room each frame needs to fit the dialogue and the action that needs to take place within that dialogue. Um, so you block out the text, the pacing of the strip, and then you get the blue pencil out and you do the really scribbly stuff to put the characters where you want them, and then the softer, darker graphite comes out, and then you uh, build that into much more finished looking characters. Now, 20 years ago, then I would get out the ink, the bottle of ink and the quill pen or the watercolor brush or whatever way I happen to be using it at the time. For the past 10 or maybe even 15 years now, um, I will scan the very finished pencil drawing into a Photoshop document and use that as my sketch, and then I will ink it digitally. I'll do that, but I cannot bring myself to do the whole thing digitally. When I'm sketching them all out, I really need to feel that pencil on the page. I need to be able to see the whole thing at once. It's uh, I'm just too old school. I look at younger students now, and they do everything practically on their phone, and I can't quite do that, but I have gone to digital inking, and yeah, then it's the same thing. I'll ink the outlines, and then I will do the shading. Well, I'll do the lettering first because the lettering you can only move that around so long. You can't change the size of the lettering. You can change the pose of the characters. You can change the size of the characters, but yeah, then I'll do the shading. And the shading, in spite of doing it on a computer, which by doing it on a computer, I'm using a tablet. I'm using an iPad as a sidecar, but the iPad serves as a tablet with a pressure sensitive Apple pencil or pen or whatever they call it in this iteration. But it's all done by hand. It's just digital, and I don't know if it's a control thing or a frequency thing or an I like the way it looks better that way thing. And then ship it off to Kansas City to the syndicate and turn right around and starting on the Sunday. I haven't been able to pull myself far enough ahead on the deadlines where I get to really enjoy a gap. I just you just keep cranking it out.
Do you ever miss the traditional inking? Did you use a pen, did you say? Or
I I experiment with the best of them, and some of it I used a quill pen for, and some of it I used a watercolor brush for. But um, yeah, I suppose sometimes I miss it, and I miss having the original art that looks that finished.
right.
But I don't miss it that much because, like I said, I I use a pressure sensitive pen on a
Mhm.
tablet, and it really doesn't feel that much different than drawing it by hand feels. And as far as the original art, it's so funny. I draw pretty clean, and so the original art would almost look like a printout anyway. So it's kind of neat to have the finished digitally inked art uh, over here, while you've still got the pencil art over there that actually looks more like an artifact, like a piece of artwork, rather than a printed out document. So I kind of like having it both ways.
Okay. I really like I really love your line work. I think that's one of the things that kind of drew me into the strip.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
yeah, it's just so nice and neat and cartoony and precise. Um, like I'm looking right now at some of the rendering on like Frazz's kind of like jumpsuit, the line work on that. It's just amazing. The dedication you have to getting those lines in there and making them convey the shadows that you want and the form that you want. You're a master at that.
Oh, thanks. I've had more than one good art teacher, and they really taught me the value of light falling across a form. I really try to make my characters as 3D as possible without making them too complex. So you just made me feel really good, like I might be getting something right.
You definitely are. Like I say, it was the art that drew me in. And you mentioned how I think sometimes comic strips kind of are discussed with the idea of a gag a day, but I don't think that does the deeper strips justice. I feel like you tell stories with funny beats, not a gag a day. You know what I mean? Um,
I think I do, yeah.
I feel like your strip kind of has that in common with things like Bloom County and Calvin and Hobbes, where they were just telling stories. I had a friend one time say that he was a big Calvin and Hobbes fan, and it wasn't that he found them all like just completely hilarious. It was that they were so addictive. Like those little
Hmm.
stories were just so addictive, and I think yours has that in common. Like you're telling stories with funny beats. You're not doing a gag a day strip.
I I hope to agree with you. Yeah, that's one of the things I want to do. Although I never want to let myself forget that every strip I do could be the first phrase someone sees.
Mhm.
So I don't want to leave them scratching their head like, what just happened here? There was supposed to be a punchline. I want each strip to be able to stand on its own, but I want the stories to be able to continue. I want the characters to have staying power, and I think that fits into what you were describing with Calvin and Hobbes and Bloom County as well as man, those strips had such strong characters, and I hope to do that too. Uh, but but yeah, while still keeping a gag a day in there without making it a gag a day strip.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
feel like the warmth of your characters, like you can read one strip, a conversation between Caulfield and Frazz, and you already know everything you need to know about it. Not everything you need to know, but you're very introduced to these characters and who they are just from one strip. Their personalities shine through.
Oh, that thanks very much. That helps me too, to be perfectly honest. I don't know how the single panel gag a day people do it One of my best friends and one of my cartoon heroes is Dave Coverly, who draws Speed Bump. It's
Oh yeah.
fantastic. And I have no idea how he can start from scratch every single day. I've got characters that I can sit back and stare out the window and listen to those characters have conversations inside my head until one of them serves up a line that I can eavesdrop on and say, hey, I can do something with this, and I run from there. That's a real advantage to having strong characters. And I really admire the cartoonists who can do it without that. But I also really love the strips that have the strong characters.
Yeah. The
That's
Oh,
oh,
go ahead,
sorry.
Jason.
I was just going to say that's something you can see in the strip from the beginning. The way that you just sort of unfold the character, you get to see him and the way that the kids relate to him, and then you also have this really wonderful commentary that comes in sometimes about the world, about education. So lots of layers there. Adam, I cut you off. Were you going to say something else there?
Oh,
I
you
was.
didn't cut me off at all. Oh, Adam, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to comment. You were talking about the one panel strips, and I was just going to mention Far Side and that surreal humor, and it's almost like he was tapping into something completely different for that surreal humor every
He
day.
did. He had characters too. I mean, he
Yeah.
definitely had characters. He was a world apart in so many ways. Just fantastic.
And I
It's
didn't.
funny you mentioned the characters uh, and the commentary,
Hmm.
and that's a really interesting kicking off point. Uh, if I can veer a little bit on that, is that before I did Frazz. I mentioned I was working as an art director, photo editor, copy editor at a news bureau in the Capitol. One of my other jobs for a few years there was drawing editorial cartoons.
Hmm.
And so I was familiar with commenting on the world. And of course, once Frazz was syndicated and in enough papers that I could let go of the day job and try and get back to a little bit more normal a life, I was amazed at how relieved I felt not drawing the editorial cartoons. I loved drawing the editorial cartoons, make no mistake, but I didn't realize just how much work and how much stress it was to get pissed off on a schedule. It's like, oh, geez, it's Tuesday. Well, what am I going to get mad at now? And that was hard.
Mhm.
But I still had that taste for commentary. But even when I was drawing editorial cartoons, I didn't want to be the mean guy.
Hmm.
But a lot of my peers were because that's what sold. And when I started doing the comic strip, that was one of the things I set up for myself is like, no, I am not gonna be the mean guy. I don't think the world is that way, and I don't want to give anybody the impression that it is any more than it is. So that's where the warmth and the commentary and then it also goes back to giving the readers credit for not only being college educated but for being thoughtful, for being nice people. Why would a mean person read a nice comic strip? So
Hmm.
uh, I knew how I wanted my audience to be.
Love that.
Um, so we've mentioned Calvin and Hobbes and Bill Watterson several times, and I know that he was so um, he closely guarded Calvin and Hobbes. There are very few um, merchandise items out there for Calvin and Hobbes. It's like what, one T-shirt and one teaching book that's like $800 on eBay, and I think there might have been like one other thing. Um, I was wondering your stance on that because I need a Frazz T-shirt. That's basically where all this is going. I just basically need a Frazz T-shirt. That's what I.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe I can sketch one out for you or something. There's nothing like that out there commercially. Um, if I were a better businessman, there might be, or if Fraz were a bigger comic strip. Uh, you know, it's a good solid successful comic strip, but it ain't it ain't Peanuts. It ain't Calvin and Hobbes. It's not in that many papers. So I don't have people rushing up to try and do that business for me. So there's really not a lot out there in the way of Frazz merchandise. I wouldn't I wouldn't be as hardline as Bill Watterson if that opportunity did come along. I know why he did what he did, or I can speculate on it. I can't get inside his head, but um, I understand that he didn't want that distraction. But for the rest of the world, that didn't stop a whole bunch of fake Calvin and Hobbes
Right.
stuff from showing up. So basically, what Watterson did was ensure that anyone who loved Calvin and Hobbes enough to get their hands on some Calvin and Hobbes merchandise got their hands on counterfeit Calvin and Hobbes merchandise. But it worked out. He seems to be pretty happy and satisfied with what he's doing. Again, total speculation on my part.
Would you want to see a Frazz like animated series? Because I would.
The thought has been floated a few times, and also a live action series too.
Hmm.
Ah,
And um, yeah, the idea is really intriguing, but it also that's where you run into the same problems that Bill Watterson actually had to deal with and dealt with by saying no thanks. Is that suddenly you're not in control anymore. When you draw a comic strip, what a great job for a control freak. You came up with the characters, you tell the characters what to say, theoretically. Most of the time, they tell me what to tell them to say. That's kind of the weird side of writing and with strong characters is after a while you kind of barely control them anymore and they do their own writing. But yeah, you would give up a certain amount of control and you would risk not only having the strip be different from what you envisioned, but we all know the hierarchy of television and movies sitting on top of everything else. Um, the version of your comic strip that is not what you envisioned would not only be out there, but it would probably be the predominant version of it. So Um, but that none of that has been tested by me. Nothing ever reached the stage where I actually had to make a decision to greenlight my own work. I've had people who were interested in it, and it never got to the point of a pilot episode, which in some ways is good. The most recent one um, kind of fell apart. Just as COVID was hitting, and it thoroughly fell apart then. But they were talking about trying to come up with some sort of a streaming live action series of Frazz, and then it didn't happen. And shortly after that, Adam's Elementary came out,
Mhm.
which would have uh, eaten anything else for lunch. It's so good. So I think, well, that timing worked out okay. But it's always nice to think of, yeah,
yeah.
who would you have do the voices? Who would you have do the characters? Um, it's fun, and I think it's healthy to picture your creation in a different format, and it helps you write it in the format that you've got it.
Have you ever considered going to, and maybe you have, like comic conventions? Like Bill Amen from Foxtrot has done Heroes Con in Charlotte, North Carolina, the last, uh, I don't know, he's shown up 3 or 4 times maybe now. Would you ever consider going to a convention? Basically, I want you to come to Heroes Con. That's what I'm saying.
um, I don't really, this is going to sound bad, but I don't even really go to the National Cartoonist Society conventions anymore. Um, uh, I have a hard time pulling far enough ahead on my deadlines to feel like I've got that much spare time for travel. And if I do get a chance to travel, I don't necessarily want to travel to do more cartoon stuff. If I've got a week, I want to go explore some places with my wife or on my own. And I'm much more of a granola munching hippie than that. And I want to go backpacking. I want to go to a race somewhere. I don't want to go into a convention hall. Even though I love cartooning, it would be more of the same. And I just I haven't really gone to any of those. Um, I imagine it would be all sorts of fun, and I imagine it would be a lot of meeting people just like you. Which how cool is that? It would be great, but I just haven't felt like I've had the time and the resources to spend that way. That was a long excuse.
Ah, work-life balance. Love it. We appreciate work-life balance.
Yep.
Oh, that's
Very,
good.
very much.
Yeah.
Well, especially since when you're drawing a comic strip, you can't make stuff up, not 365 times a year. So you've really got to go out and have the most interesting life that you can outside of comics and then steal from that.
Hmm.
So that suddenly makes the work-life balance part of work.
Well, Jason, I feel like I've fanboyed a lot on this podcast. Do you want to get in there with a final question?
Sure, sure. So we can do kind of a two-parter. I know we promised you the question of if you could adapt any character or sort of take on any character, uh,
Mm,
what would you take on? So that kind of leads nicely from what we were saying about ways that Frazz might be adapted in kind of the opposite direction. And then we usually close out with just kind of a what's next and where can we find out more sort of question.
okay, okay. So, what character would I like to adapt um, into my own style? Was
Hmm.
that the question?
Yeah, yeah.
That's a tough one too. It's a terrific question, and it's a tough one. Um, I have trouble coming up with a specific character because, again, how am I going to reinvent something that somebody else has already done well enough to get my attention?
Mhm.
Um, so I'm going to sidestep that question just a little bit without trying to be hedgy and say that I would very much love to. Well, this goes back to the kind of people that I learn from. Um, so styles rather than characters. And again, we've got the singer-songwriters who can tell a story just great. And I've got a few of those that I still listen to all the time. Todd Snyder, who's a kind of a folk rocker, man, can he tell a story, and man, can he turn a phrase. He's just wonderful. Lyle Lovett has always been and will always be that guy too. And um, one of my big heroes died during COVID. Um, was Adam Schlesinger, who was um, half of the singing songwriting duo that fronted a band called Fountains of Wayne. Chris Collingwood was the other. And those two, oh my gosh, their songwriting ability is just fantastic. I would love to, I shouldn't say I would love to be able to write like them. I keep trying to write like them, and I will until the day I can't do it anymore. Authors, the same type of a thing. Vonnegut,
Mm.
uh, I love Vonnegut, and I love the way he challenges readers to think by coming at them sideways. And that's what I always want to do is, come at things sideways. I don't want to hit anyone over the head with anything, but I want them to think. I don't want to amuse as much as I want to enlighten. And if I can do that through amusement, so much the better. And nobody ever did that as well as Vonnegut did. And then finally, I'm going to cite hometown hero Elmore Leonard,
Uh,
who his characters just could talk. And that's exactly the way he would put it too, is his characters had to talk. Of course, Elmore Leonard did crime novels, and so the follow-up was that is if a character couldn't talk, he had to have him shot. I don't have that option, but it would be a totally different comic strip. But oh man, Elmore Leonard could say so much, or his characters could say so much in so few words, and it was his characters who said it. It was, he didn't do a lot of describing what happens in the background. It was all through his character's dialogue and actions, and that's who I'd like to be too. So I'd like to be those singer-songwriters, and I would like to be those writers uh, while still being myself. That's the never-ending goal.
I'm also a fellow Vonnegut fan. Vonnegut and
Yep.
Salinger, right there.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
teach I teach Harrison Bergeron by Vonnegut.
Ah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
you're
that's a classic short story. It's so wonderful.
it really is.
And just so one of the main supporting characters in Frazz is Caulfield, which goes to J.D. Salinger. But if his, I had to choose the two names that I was debating was, do I call him Caulfield or do I call him Harrison? So
Really,
yeah, I'd
Nice.
say that you guys and I are pretty well on the same wavelength here.
Sounds like it. It sounds like it.
there are lines of that story that just, I mean, I've taught it a million times now, but still, they're just so well written, even from like the first time reading it. They just kind of sink in there and just don't let you go. Good,
Hmm.
good stuff.
Uh,
One of the lines from Harrison is when they still have their handicaps in and everything, and they Harrison wants the music to play, and before they play it for real, they play it, and it said that it sounded cheap, silly, and false, and that phrasing has always stuck with me, and I can honestly say your strip is not cheap, silly, or false. It is the exact opposite of that. It is heartwarming. It's a wonderful strip, thought-provoking, full of warmth. Good stuff.
You have made my day. You have made my year. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. If I'm a listener out there and I want to find out more, if I want to go see uh, Frazz and check out more of your work, where might I do that?
Well, if your local newspaper carries it, that's fantastic. If your local newspaper doesn't, there's a couple of ways that you can find Frazz. One is it's on gocomics.com daily. That's my syndicate's web page. And I also, if you want a little bit of a bonus to go with that, I have a Facebook page that I update every single day. Every morning at 6, I post a link that will take you to today's Frazz strip on gocomics.com. So it's, pretty shamelessly a driver of traffic to that. But what you get for going through Facebook, in addition to probably having your data mined, but that happens everywhere. Um, what you get by going through Facebook is I also write a little piece of commentary to go with every single day's strip. So if you want a double dose of Jeff's head, then you can, sometimes it's just a couple of sentences and sometimes it's you know, almost a novella. I'll get carried away. And sometimes it'll be directly related to the strip, and sometimes it'll be barely related to the strip, but it still goes through my thought process of what I'm thinking while I was drawing it. There's a lot of times I'll go straight to telling a story about myself and my past rather than disguising it through the comic strip. There's a lot of me in the comic strip, but it's disguised, it's layered. Barely, but it's layered. Um, but you can get that extra commentary through Facebook and then click right over to gocomics.com and see the full thing. And those are probably your two best ways. Or if your newspaper doesn't carry it, and you still subscribe, God bless you. Call them up and ask. You never know. They're they're dying for feedback. So let's get it out there.
Absolutely.
Very nice. Well, Jason, do you want to play us out here on this episode?
Certainly. I don't play anything. I don't have any instruments or anything, but we always close by saying that we hope everybody out there stays obsessive. We put this out on Instagram and YouTube, so we welcome comments, we welcome feedback, and hope you stay obsessive with comics. Be a comics obsessive, because it's a fairly safe obsession, and unlike other obsessions like fine wine, it doesn't cost quite as much.
I haven't lost that obsession in 60 years, so it's probably sticking with me.
All right. Well, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.